Alright, we're on air. So do you want to start with the introduction or?
Hey, welcome to Anything and Everything with Reason, our very first inaugural podcast about reason, philosophical arguments, discussions, and logic. So take it away. This your host with Riordan and me, Andrew.
The venerable Andrew. All right, so we're gonna do news of the week as the first podcast. This is just our test one, so we're just doing the rough outline of the show. So the first section is news of the week. I'm actually gonna start with one that I only just recently viewed like a few minutes ago, like an hour ago, which was the whistling Turkish. So in Turkey, obviously because they're a mountainous area and you need to be able to talk without having to walk over straight to where you need to talk to the person. They have a language.
Language, yes.
Yeah, it's effectively a whistling language. And the interesting thing that I actually looked up on it was, see, I'm sure this research has happened a long while ago. We've only just found out about it, like every good thing in science. But effectively, generally, language is being localized to the left-hand side of the brain.
Yes, so actually read somewhat the same article in Ars Technica, yes. Yeah,
you saw it as well. So it's effectively saying that really, in this language, though it's not, it's actually between both hemispheres of the brain. So it's not just localization. So they were saying that your development of your brain is based on whether or not like the stress is involved with the language and what kind of language you learn. So, I mean, it's just more evidence.
One of the upshots was that they said these people with languages are actually able to effectively multitask properly because it doesn't actually take away concentration from other task areas of the brain. So, which is
yeah, it's really interesting to hear. I mean, it's like it makes a lot of sense though if you're just like, I don't want to go and ask whether or not they're going to come over for dinner or something like.
Yes, because it carries over a much longer distance across the steppes and the plains.
Yeah, it was like, they said it was something like 5 kilometers that they could make.
Yes, yeah.
That's a lot of distance. All right, have you got another one? You got one for a week?
Oh, one you were actually mentioning today, and I also happened to read up on recently in my latest issue of Australasian Science. And I'll just show you the cover for the people at home or actually watching. Great magazine for understanding science without being complicated. It breaks it down to the more laywoman level. So we're talking about quantum tunneling in an instant, and a Professor Anatoly Kayafet, I hope I'm saying that right, of the Australian National University, found with quantum tunneling that the timescales they've looked at for electrons traveling from one place to another through a quantum tunnel are actually a lot shorter than they originally calculated. So they're finding it appears, it's not actual, but actually appears to be traveling faster than the speed of light. Now, before people go, oh my God, you can't travel faster than the speed of light, that is correct. What is actually happening is it is because of the quantum tunneling effect is effectively in both places at once, because it is creating a bridge between the 2 points. So when they're calculating the time for the electron to create the tunnel and then exit tunnel at the other end, the calculation shows it traveling faster than the speed of light, but in real terms, it actually isn't. The reason why they may want to understand about this process is it can lead to faster, smaller components, better understanding of the electron microscopy, that's using electron microscope, and also nuclear fusion and how DNA mutations happening.
So were they is DNA on the scale of being able to have these quantum tunneling events? I mean, I know that transistors and so on and so forth are. I mean, I know that DNA is quite
because
small.
DNA is it's very much at the atomic level. You're only talking a few atoms across, as you know. Quantum tunneling effect can knock out particular atoms in a molecule and change the molecular structures, so it can have an effect. So quantum tunneling inside the body, as we were discussing before about the mind-brain issue, may actually have an effect on DNA. So these are some of the things they're going to be looking at as well. Yeah, they've never before been able to have a level of accuracy in understanding the speed and that the electrons move through in a quantum tunnel effect. Quantum tunneling basically means an electron would create a bridge between 2 points in space, which relatively appears that it will travel faster than the speed of light. When in actuality, what is happening is it is bridging the 2 points. So it's bringing the 2 points together, so they're closer together, so it appears that they're traveling further apart.
Isn't it simple? It's like not a gravity well, but a positionary well. So you've got where it's supposed to be, and then where it's not supposed to be, or is it actually?
If we imagine,
it's tunneling through that. Like,
imagine we have 2 points, point A and point B, and if we quantum tunneling brings the points together, so the distance traveling is actually shorter. So when we measure it, it appears that they're traveling through space quicker than it actually traveling. Basically, it creates a tunnel, a quantum tunnel.
Curvature of space, not just some kind of potential. So it is actually traveling.
This happens at a level below that of atoms. It's actually at, say, in this case, the components of atoms. We're talking about an electron. The quantum tunneling effect has a big effect in electronics. So the smaller the devices get, they actually have a bleeding effect and also quantum tunneling when an electron will jump from one transistor to another, even though they're separated with an insulator, and will actually break through that insulator. Now, when the effect is gone, it may not necessarily cause any damage, and it will never show signs that it actually gone from one through the other. Basically, the electrons are passing through a solid object from one side to the other and appearing faster than they should appear if we were to go just by classical physics. But as we know, with quantum tunneling, it just is that they're in both places at the same time. So the classic game Portal, if anyone's ever played that, shows, it appears that you're leaving as you're coming at the same time, because you're literally creating a portal from one side of the room to the other. So for any of you uber nerds out there and gamers will understand the effect. So that's essentially quantum tunneling. So so that's the latest.
You're an uber nerd.
I'm an uber nerd. So yeah. The latest is that they're actually better able to measure the relative times for traveling between the points. So they're not actually able to measure the position of the electron itself, but they are able to measure its effect. So it creates a weak nuclear magnetic field around it. So that's one of the stories I've been looking at. So yeah, Australasian Science, check it out. It's a short, small article, very easy to understand. And yes, unfortunately, you do have to pay to read. So, but it's well worth it.
Well, it's like a lot of the journals. A lot of the journals are like that as well.
Yes, yeah.
But
somebody has to produce it. So, yeah, moving on.
Sorry, yep.
So that's it from me on that. Yep, moving on.
All right. Well, we got two other ones that are interesting. I mean, we were covering it before, but I'll say I was talking about. It's kind of a news issue, but more or less about the Ashley Madison thing. I just want to talk about it because it's still people are still going on about it. I wanted to see what we thought about it in regards to the leaking of information. I mean, from my standpoint, I think that what's happened, even though I don't agree with people that cheat, I still think it's a bit fucked up to be sending like everyone's personal details.
There is a expectation that a level of privacy would be surrounding when you're joining up to a site like that, and that information you would expect it to be private, realistically expect it to be private, and to take that information and spread it around is not only breaking someone's expectation of privacy, but it's really an infringement of their personal liberty, because essentially what you're saying by leaking that information is we want to peer behind what's happening behind the curtains in your house, and you have no expectation to a level of comfort and security and privacy in your home. in your own home. So the leaking of the information is really a breach of a person's trust in the social contract.
I mean, I think it's more imperative, like more important that people. It's not even that, like, I don't agree with it, but I don't agree with people cheating. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like there are a lot bigger consequences to this.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is the leaking of information.
Well, it might not just even. Well, some people might have been on the site but never used it. They just looked at it for no reason. They just look at it for the sake of looking at it, and then they're going to get in trouble. Or they might have, you know, there could be complete relationships that break up, children that get fucked up by this. Like, there's lots of different issues. So, like, I don't agree with it, but I also think that it's kind of a bit like crazy that people are kind of. There's so many people jumping on the emotional bandwagon rather than actually.
It is an emotive issue because of partners and relationships, and some people see it as cheating. I myself don't see that as a personal cheating because I'm of a different view. But we both agree at this point that people are entitled to their privacy and have an expectation of private information remaining private. Yeah. There's a difference between when you go on, say, a site like Facebook, where you know what you're posting is going to be possibly seen by nearly anyone, and there is no privacy in what you're setting out there, as to joining up a site like Ashley Madison or Adult Friend Finder or Cupid or any of those dating sites. That
Yeah, sorry.
You expect your private information to be private and what you want public to be public, and the two should never meet. Essentially, we have a right to close our curtains and a right to cover our windows up. So by the people leaking this information, it's not doing a service per se to the rights in privacy. In fact, it's doing quite the opposite. It's pandering to the people who don't want privacy, to the governments who want to access all our information without us having a right to privacy. I love it when governments say, but, if you're not doing anything wrong, it shouldn't matter. Yes, but nobody likes to get undressed in front of an open window. Except for the few that do. But generally, the point is you like to be able to have some privacy, and the people in Ashley Madison.
Depends who's on the other side of the window, doesn't it? Anyway,
Ashley Madison are entitled to that privacy. So we both agreed that, it is an issue of privacy.
It's an issue of privacy, but I think that the main thing is that I'm a bit disappointed that people are jumping. Like, the only reason why this has been able to proliferate is because people are jumping on the emotional bandwagon. They're not using their heads. They're just thinking, cheating is bad. I just like cheating. I mean, look, like I said, I just like cheating. You may not. Some other people might not. They might see it differently. I know that your views are more to do with, like, polyamory. You can have a relationship and something else as long as the other person. If
that's your choice, yes, yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, like...
I think this is... you're right, it is an emotive issue, but it's still an issue of privacy. And if we put the emotion aside about it, people's privacy is being and trust has been broken in this respect. Not so much from Ashley or somewhat from Ashley Madison, because they should have deleted the data when they said they were going to delete private data.
Did you see that?
Yes.
The pay to have your data deleted, and it did nothing.
And it did nothing. They didn't delete it. They obviously kept it aside for their thinking, I believe, would have been, for a business point of view, is maybe we can get these people back again in the future. No, they would hold on to their data. It wasn't a matter of selling. It was a matter of keeping an account ready for these people if they wish to come back, or to follow them up to maybe get them to reactivate. A bit of upsell, a bit of selling. So, in that instance, they are wrong, because they had told people, yes, we're going to delete your data, and they haven't. So it's no difference to a security company saying, yes, we'll lock all your doors and make sure no one can get in, and then leaving the door open after they walk inside to check that no one's there, and then walk away with the door unlocked. So anyone can then get in.
So. Yeah, It's pretty fun. I mean,
Yeah.
we've pretty much covered the topic. I mean, like I said, we have different views on it. But I mean, obviously, I'm against
We have different
it.
views on the useless on the people why the use the site, but not on the privacy issue.
Yeah, not on the privacy thing. I think that there are bigger issues that are caused by leaking people's data that are much worse.
Very much.
Anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Vomiting machine.
Yes, you told me about this. I was quite surprised. Go ahead.
Yes, the vomiting machine. So there was a vomiting machine that's been produced. I'll link all this stuff later on in the video, on the description later on. But there was the vomiting machine, which they effectively it's got a reasonable purpose, but the picture of it,
it's not a small child.
I suggest looking at the picture. It's fucking amazing. Where it's got like the clay face and it looks so distressed. But it's effectively they're just trying to test whether or not, I mean, stuff like this happens all the time. They do this all kind of stuff all the time. It looks silly, but it's useful. But they were doing a vomiting machine to see how the norovirus is spread, and they actually found out that in the general mechanical spewing, there's about 30 viral, like it's like 30 viral loads. There's like 30 viruses. I think individual viruses, like all of that copy of that virus that get spewed, like get ejected during that mechanical process, and you only need about 20 for a successful infection. So it's useful to know that you can actually spread it, like the rate of spread that you can have from those kind of things.
Is this 20 milligrams of fluid of virus, or is there a particular scale we're talking about?
I think it's actually just 30. They mean like 30 copies of the virus within that bulk of fluid. So it might not.
That's small.
It might not sound like much, but apparently 20 is enough.
Wow, that is it's that infectious.
I'll have a look. Yeah. Have you got another one?
Oh, another short news article. Cool. Yes. What were we talking about this week? Recently it delves slightly into the point of politics and environment. Being polled recently, myself, one of the news organisations polling me, in this case it happens to be linked to a university. The person polling was actually quite surprised. I was one of the few people that actually mentioned that one of the big issues to date is anthropogenic global warming. Most people who've been interviewing at to that point, their biggest concern of what was going to affect the future of the world was economics. And it was quite surprising, considering that there was a follow-up study, I believe, that showed that 60% of people had most of their focus on economics, and less than 7% were looking at 10 to 7%, I believe, were looking at global warming as an issue that was going to affect their future. When I'm thinking, well, it's great to think about economics, but if you don't have a livable environment in which plants thrive and grains can grow and people can survive, then I don't see how economics trumps environment.
I think that a lot of people underestimate. I mean, to be honest, in regards to warming is an issue, but I think the bigger issue is the acidification of the ocean. And,
that is very much linked to the warming. But the fact that people in general, most of the population those who did believe that it is real, which it is, because of the overwhelming evidence that has come up year after year after year, even with adjustments. What
was it? This July was the highest average temperature on record ever.
Yeah, and when you look at the total charts, it is literally a reverse hockey stick. In this case, the hook's at the other end, and it is skyrocketing. And the fact that people are putting it lower down on their list of priorities. I don't know whether it's because, as somebody said, they feel it's beyond their immediate grasp to be able to do something. because therefore it's too big a problem to tackle. Let's leave it to the politicians and don't care about it ourselves, or whether they're starting to believe some of the popular press in this country, in Australia, we're really on a three press system. Three major companies run the press here, and some are completely biased against science and the findings in actual science, and are prepared to push economic agendas and their own political agendas rather than tell the truth in the news. Well, let's face it, newspapers are designed to sell adverts, not to sell the news. So, yeah, in Australia, unfortunately, we have a press that has a tendency to one particular M-owning news organisation, the owner's name starting with M, who I shall not mention. It's pushing agenda that's anti-environment. He does not believe that the environment is a part of an issue of his business interests, and he pushes against it. And unfortunately, global warming appears to be, from all the evidence and from looking around, an actual real problem. And we're starting to see the effects now. And yeah, it's something the general population needs to have more of a focus on, whether that's due to not only bad media or science not communicating enough. That is an issue I guess we're going to have to look at more in the future. So that's my current news.
I wanted to make sure I can hear my echo. I just want to make sure that I just correct myself. It's actually as few as 36 and as many as 13,000 virus particles released during one spewing session.
Wow.
So
that's few as 36.
But yeah, that's a lot. So yeah. Are we gonna move on to the main topic now? Because we've got about 30 minutes.
Yes,
maybe.
I'd say.
And we can move on. If there are no viewers, which is okay, it doesn't really matter. If there's no viewers, we'll just go back to some of the news, because we've got more.
All right. Yeah, will be funny for the podcast. We'll be put it up on YouTube, so it will be available on YouTube later, folks.
Yep.
For those of you who actually seen it,
because there are some pressing issues like the. I hope I'm right in saying the non-event of North Korea threatening South Korea. So we don't. Who knows? Maybe it might happen, but I doubt it. He said it would happen.
And yes, the saber rattling and the threat of going to war between North and South. This is an ongoing issue with North and South. And yeah, North Korea have a basic policy of military first above all else. So that is above diplomacy, military above the rights of the people, military above rational thinking, in fact. There is a schism in their thinking. And
yeah, it's schism, crazy.
Yeah, it is it's basically a persecution complex. They are in a psychotic state, a permanent psychotic state. And to say that for a nation is an unusual thing, but in this case, it is a very apt thing to say.
Well, it's like shaking down a country. It's like being like, we're going to do something. If you don't do this, we're going to do it. Honest to God, I swear, for realsies, we're going to do it. And then, but anyway, we'll talk about this afterwards. I'm going to start with the free will part of this, and then we'll move on to the consciousness part, because I think it's my fault. It's taking on a little bit too much more than what we could chew this time, because it's a very fucking complex issue. But we'll start with the free will part. So, do we think that free will is possible in the conventional sense? in the very conventional sense of that you can do what you want to do. You're the one that gets to decide. I mean, you know what I think, but what do you think?
I used to believe free will was a real thing. And now, after looking at many studies, I'm starting to believe it might possibly actually be an illusion of free will. Now, why do I say this? There are several studies using currently up-to-date MRIs, functional magnetic resonant imaging, which looks at the heat patterns in the fault areas of the brain. Now, simple tests they have done. One of them is the predetermined test. We ask a question, you have to press button A or button B. Now, asking the question, there is a gap between when you think about it and when you press it. When they do the test, nearly every time they do the test, before the person presses the button, the tester can see which button they're going to press by which area the brain lights up. So if you press with your left hand for button A and your right hand for button B, a particular area of the brain will light up, which operates the left hand. A particular area of the brain's going to light up, which operates the right. Now, the tester knows the answer before you know the answer yourself. This happens time and time again. All right. So in the short term, this is just a short term. So we're looking, so in the short term, it doesn't appear to be an actual, your brain, your subconscious has already decided which button you're going to press before you've consciously decided, before the conscious thought area of your brain lights up. Now, in the long term, what does this mean? Does this mean all long-term decisions that we make, our subconscious, our environment, our hardwiring in our brain, if it was a hardwiring from, i.e. neurons being written over and over so they become fixed, are predetermined? Are they?
Firing. Yeah.
Is our overall behavior and future planning predetermined and not actually a choice, but a predetermined fixed set of behavioral patterns? This is the question I have been asking myself of late, considering that your brain determines things before you determine things, before your thoughts, before you say, I do want that extra piece of ice cream. Your brain has already determined, no, you don't. And you go, maybe I don't, and you don't.
Yeah,
So
I think that I'll interject here because in regards to the Benjamin Libet, you already know my views. I obviously don't believe that free will exists. But yeah, those tests related to Benjamin Libet, and they were done quite a while ago, and effectively it was active volition tests. You hook up an EEG.
They have updated them to more accurately reflect the way the brain functions now, though. Yes.
I think they were actually doing it with MRIs as well. At one point they were doing, but effectively you do an active volition. They decide, they press a button, but they also take note of the time. Usually, that one of the most common ones is like a clock hand, and as it goes around, they know when they want to make a decision, and then they do it when they're going to do it. And it's funny because they can do it from about 500 milliseconds to a second before you know what you're going to do. So that's really, really good evidence to suggest that there is something going on there.
A component of
at least some mechanism behind there that predetermines that. Whether or not we have a choice subconsciously is a more is a different thing. But I think consciousness, having a conscious decision, I don't think exists. Maybe subconsciously, but that's going to be more complex.
Maybe you do have conscious decisions, but whether you have conscious control, really, it's for me, it almost as it appears that it's an illusion of control, whereas your brain is already predetermined ahead of time due to the way the brain is structured. So you may not actually have a choice because it is not a thought, therefore I'm going to, am I taking the left road or the right road? No, your brain said, you are taking the left road, there is no choice.
The biggest issue I have with these is because you have to think from a macroscopic view. What's the point? It's you're interacting with your environment. So for you to have free will, you have to be isolated from your environment and not be under the laws of nature. And there are a lot of smart.
The only way to do that is to remove you out of your headspace, literally. You actually remove the laws of nature, which means your brain and your external environment are the things that are affecting you. So until the day we can download our consciousness into the machine, when the singularity happens, a long way away, folks, then it's going to be a bit of an open question, I think.
I think that the main issue here is that a lot of people decide this is the argument that a lot of people fall back on, because they know, okay, well, look, the reality is real. The brain, we know the brain has something to do with processing. We can't deny this. So therefore, we're going to go with dualism, the idea that there's some other aspect to the way that your brain functions that's not bound to physics, is some abstract thing. Some people like David.
We do know that the brain is programmed through thought, the reinforcing neuron tracks by repeating the same thought or the same action over and over again reinforces that neuron, and the other tracks therefore die off. So, yeah, we may lay down choices, hardwired choices, but we get to switch between those choices. That's why I say I don't think free will is absolutely real, and I also don't think it's absolutely predetermined. I'm in the uncertain space myself at this stage. I think that's why I say an illusion of free will rather than because I think we do have choices, but we have a choice that's been hardwired between A, B, or C, or D, or even A and B, and we can't just call an existence option F. We can't, because it's not wired. We haven't had it wired in yet. So it is a type of free will, I think, and that was something else we're going to have to also debate about in the future once we both have more information and knowledge on that. Yeah, and also going on what current knowledge is available. So, yeah. It's one of those tricky topics, and it's a can of worms we opened. We're not going to put the worms back into that can, but we're going to try and sort them out in the future as this program progresses.
I've got a few things. I've got a question in regards to the consciousness part later on, but I got a few interesting points which actually make a lot of sense. So have you ever heard about the Stimociever?
The
Stimociever. It was made by I hope I'm pronouncing this, Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado. He was a very well-known neurologist, did a lot of neuroscience and stuff like that. Was very well known.
Link to the reference later at the end of the show.
Yeah,
of course.
I'll put a link to reference later.
So
effectively, the Stimociever was kind of the father, the modern day, like the father of modern day, like deep brain stimulation. But it was a lot. The experiments were a lot more. What's the best way to put this? Real and a little bit more nasty, because he was dealing with actual live subjects, including some people as well. So effectively, it was the implantation of electrodes in specific parts of the brain, with primates, once with a cat, and a really famous example with a bull.
Yeah, unfortunately nowadays you can't do that sort of thing, because there's that pesky little ethics that gets in the way of that sort of stuff nowadays.
And the issue here is that if there's some level of dualism to the mind, then why is it that we have this capability, for one, with things like the Stimociever being able to, we're not just directly controlling action. So for example, with the Stimociever, when he did it with the bull, he was actually influencing parts of the brain that deal with aggression. So he was actually influencing the thought process. He wasn't just stopping the bull by controlling a motor neuron pathway. He was actually doing that. And there was another example where he was effectively doing kind of like integrated aversion therapy. So I think it's really interesting that you've got your mind works in this way where it's kind of like a feedback loop in a sense, like so with aversion therapy, you can actually reinforce something and reinforce it into the system. And also, just for the example,
cognitive therapy and behaviours is very effective on long term. It is, yes.
And just for example, things like medication. If the mind was not a physical creation, then we wouldn't be able to. These things wouldn't be effective, which they are.
Correct, they are, because the mind is a physical thing. My belief, of course, as I said to you many times, but the listeners would not yet know, is that yes, the people just say it's the big space which affects the brain. I think what you do is you can program that meat space, yes, and by your actions, by hence learning things is taking new information in and building up reinforced neurons, which then hold that information. So it's not just the fact that it's just the meat space, just the physical brain, which affects the way you think. I think it also, the way you think affects the brain, which is borne out by the fact that
there's this feedback.
Yeah. it does create those neuron pathways. It creates those pathways. So it's a case, I think, of software and hardware. That's right. Yeah, a lot of neurologists would disagree with me on that. Some might actually agree. But
well, I think that I don't think that there's any disagreeable with most neurologists. If you ask them, like nearly all of them, if you ask them about free will, they'll pretty much give the answer that free will doesn't exist. Or if it does exist,
it's just the meat space, as they put it. It's your brain, the meat.
They are aware, maybe more so for psychologists, but they are aware that there's an abstraction. So it's just like on a computer, there's a level of abstraction, but it's represented by what's going on the physical level as well. But,
I believe there's levels of your behaviour become fixed, but you can adjust that behavior, but it's not something that obviously happens straight away, because you have to change those neural pathways, make them die off and create new ones. So yes, it does come down a lot to meat space, but your brain is able to be influenced and change its thought patterns and its reactions from external influence by learning, by new behaviors. So it's not just limited to the physicality of the brain in that respect. Yes, it is a physical manifestation from learning, because you've created a physical link in the brain, but the fact that you can create that link suggests that we aren't just limited to the physicality of the brain.
I think the thing that makes it the most difficult for people because I mean, obviously they're separate, but they're not separate.
No,
I think
they're definitely one reflects the other, I'd say. Yeah.
Well, the term is wetware, but
yeah, which sums it up nicely.
Yeah, but I think the most difficult thing is that people don't seem to feel the issue that it's not that it's not possible, but it's very hard. There's not really much reducibility in regards to software to hardware. So it's like trying to find out what the circuitry on your fucking the circuitry of your motherboard and all the buses and everything like that is by looking at fucking Word. Like trying to figure out what program's running by looking at a board and just taking voltages.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that yes, you're definitely right there. The two together. They are the thought patterns, the behaviors, and the physicality of the brain. They're both one and the same, but at the same instance, it's not just the physical, the physicality of the brain, because we are able to use different sections of our brain. And we're not restricted to just working in one area of the brain, i.e. we're not just restricted to smell as our primary function of understanding the world. We are able to switch in and out different inputs and outputs and manipulate them, which does show a level of calculation. Even if we're talking about free will may not exist because of predetermination, but things that are predetermined can be adjusted, i.e. behaviors can change. So, yeah, one affects the other, definitely.
I think we've definitely come, I mean, through my research, I've come to the conclusion that free will in the traditional sense doesn't exist, but I would suggest that there's some level of, it's like a chaotic system. So basic laws produce very complex outputs. So it's extremely useful. So we have some form of what I wouldn't consider it free will, but there'd be a better name.
Adjustable predetermination.
Yeah,
set of predetermined outcomes, and we get to choose those set of predetermined outcomes that our brain has set up for us. Yeah,
Having some ability to be chaotic to another competitor is extremely beneficial from an evolutionary
standpoint. There is randomness to some of our functions, behaviors, and thought patterns. Yes, you're right. That does give us a competitive what's the word?
Edge. that was
when you're talking about, I'm having such a mental block at the moment. When you're talking about evolutionary terms, it does. It having not been 100% predictable is an evolutionary advantage, because most behaviors can be reduced, but not all behaviors can be reduced to an understanding. Yes. You can spot a lot of human behaviors, but there are what we call unpredictable behaviors, and they manifest, and there is an evolutionary advantage. The tiger expects you to go right, but you, and rather than dodge right or left, you jump back. You have lived to see another day because of the unpredictable nature, what the tiger or the other person who's fighting you didn't see coming. So, yeah, there is an evolutionary advantage to have a sense of chaotic systems in our brain. And you were talking about earlier, and some people have mentioned in the past that, yeah, maybe there is an actual real chaos in our brain when we get down to a quantum level, but that's something for a future time.
And extrapolates upwards and affects us to have some kind of... That's what I've always said, is just like, let's say that robots became conscious and aware, we would be very dangerous, and we would even if they might be better than us in every single way, we would still have the advantage of being extremely random and erratic. So it's
unless we gave them a really sophisticated pseudo random chip. So yes.
But that brings us on to the last real thing in regards to the free will part, which was that I wanted to talk about, which is, why would a being that doesn't have free will want to have the belief in a free will? So why from an evolutionary standpoint would a being develop the illusion of free will even though it doesn't have free will?
Yeah. To give it a reason to keep striving to improve and continue living would be one of the obvious answers. So,
I mean, it's also like the thing of death, like of believing in religion or God. I think that's invariably linked to us, because
we do have magical thinking, and that is once again back to evolution. As I say, you're on the savannah in Africa, there's rustling in the grasses. Is that a tiger or is it not? For those 9 times out of 10, it's just the wind. But if you believe it's a tiger, and that 1 time out of 10 it is, and you prepare and steady yourself and able to defend yourself and run away, you survive. That trait then gets passed on. Those who go, oh no, it definitely wasn't a tiger, get eaten, that 1 time out of 10, it doesn't get passed on. So yeah, it does have a distinct evolution advantage to have magical thinking.
I also think from another standpoint, which is, this also ties into the religion thing and the belief of God, which is that we have an evolutionary bias to believe in these things because we are so demonstrably intelligent, that we are capable of believing. So, for example, once you get to a certain level of intelligence, you're capable of predicting far enough into the future to realize that you're going to die, and and that you're not going to exist anymore, and that's an extremely big
part of the point, which comes into self-awareness.
It's a very big stressor on a creature, and then that provides anxiety, depression, all these other things that would have originally been systems that would be beneficial to deal with stresses and things in the wild. Now it's an internal issue. So to have someone that would believe in
something, I'd say the only one part of self-awareness. I mean, dogs, not all dogs, but a lot of dogs and pigs themselves, and elephants, dolphins, all have a element of self-awareness, but they don't have the dogs in particular do not have an element of mortality. They don't understand mortality. They don't see themselves as being mortal. They don't perceive a future time where events may cause them
to no longer exist.
They don't have a future sense. They don't have a sense of their own mortality, but they do have a consciousness. They are self-aware. So you can have self-awareness without a sense of mortality, which as is a perfect example, is a teenager. Teenagers believe, well, they will live forever, and they do stupid things because that section of the brain that and sense of mortality isn't yet developed. So yeah, I think having self-consciousness is a step onto all those other stresses that you talk about. So
yeah, because once you have to deal with these stresses internally, any being that it would be extremely beneficial to believe in something like that, because it still frees up your cognition to be able to take on complex tasks in the real world. You're capable of having
basically a coping mechanism. Yes,
you're capable of having this dissonance in your head that doesn't make you anxious over something that's going to inevitably happen, but you can still deal with things in the environment.
Yeah, so cognitive dissonance is, would be once again, evolutionary advantage, something that allows you to continue to function without falling to pieces, as it were. So I guess that's one way of looking at cognitive dissonance. So, never thought of it in those terms before. That's something, it was definitely worth discussing. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was thinking about was, why do beings? It's the same thing of model reality thinking. So when you think about reality, you have internal models of what's happening in reality based on your predisposed ideas and your experiences, and so. And we have different models for different things. So, like, if I'm talking to someone in a social setting, I'll be thinking using a social model, whereas if I'm doing something in reality, I might be using a 3D model in my head or doing something like that to interact with that environment and be able to predict.
We do models. We model in terms of science, we model in terms of maths, we model in terms of social interaction, and we model in terms in reference, and we use quite often our own selves and lives as our reference point for that modeling. We create visual, social, mental models of what's around us. Yes, as a way of understanding.
It's really interesting because from an evolutionary standpoint, evolution would obviously be biased towards a creature that's capable of making a quick model and acting upon it quickly, rather than being constantly unsure of itself all the time, because a being like that can't make decisions quickly, which is what you need to be able to do to be evolutionarily successful, which also means that there would be a bias towards being able to have dissonance in your head, because some models of reality, so let's say, for example, like social models, don't necessarily correlate with the empirical part of the universe, like when we're talking about physics or astronomy and how insignificant we are, yet we're capable of. So like if you're thinking about astronomy, or you're thinking about things like that, and you're thinking about these things that humans are irrelevant and insignificant, so on and so forth, then you think about people and you think how ridiculous life is. But then when you go back to normal life, you don't think about that. It's the same as like when we're talking about free will and how free will doesn't exist, and we can see that this is the thing. But when we deal with our normal environment, when we deal with other people, we think about free will as being a thing that actually exists, because it's a model in our environment that we use to like, of course I don't, like, when I'm talking to someone, I'm thinking, what are they thinking? What decision can I make? I'm not thinking, free will doesn't exist, and so therefore, quickly get the MRI, I'll figure out what this guy's thinking. It
doesn't matter what he's thinking because he's already predetermined. So yes,
you have to be able to make good guesses, because we don't understand all of the system. So we have to have a model in our heads, like an illusion of free will, or an illusion of decision, or an illusion of understanding, to be able to make good predictions about, like, reasonably good predictions, so that we can actually act in the real world in real time, which we wouldn't be able to do if we were constantly questioning.
And it's just
have you got anything else to add on to the free will debate before we go on to the consciousness one? The discussion, discussion.
No, I think that's all I have to add for that at this stage, I should say. And it's something I guess we'll keep coming back to in the future as I get more and more knowledge in the area, and as science has more knowledge on the area.
Okay, we've got one. I don't have the book with me because it's in my room. I can't be bothered going and grabbing it from my room. Including Michael. There's another book. I believe it's Michael Shermer. Michael Shermer,
yes.
Yeah, it's really. I think it is actually Michael. It is Michael Shermer. I'm pretty sure. Michael Shermer. Okay, the book, and I really recommend the book. I don't generally put books out there. The Believing Brain, really good book. It's something that people should read. It pretty much just talks about our biases and our predisposed ideas and how we think about reality.
Michael Shermer is a rationalist and skeptic, for those that don't know. And skeptic, when we use the term skeptic, we don't mean someone who doesn't believe. A skeptic is a person who believes based on the testable, verifiable evidence. And Michael Shermer is one of the big people in this area in rationalism and skepticism. So definitely worth looking at his work.
Really good book, and it covers a lot of things, especially model belief dependent reality. So obviously we have to have beliefs. Anyway, we'll talk about that later on. But yeah, it's a good book. I think I suggest reading it, and that's where I learned a lot of this kind of stuff and thought about a lot of this. But we'll go on to the consciousness part, which is what I want to ask first, why is
Yes.
consciousness required? Why does consciousness need to exist? Why do we see it in so many animals?
Yes.
Why
Well,
can't we do things?
perfect example would be if, as a very common test that a lot of biology students and psychology students will do, with the wasp and the spider test, where
Wasps are mean.
yeah, there's a certain type of wasp that actually lays its eggs in the trapdoor spiders. What it does, it will actually capture a trapdoor spider, go into the spider, drag the spider out of the trapdoor hole, paralyze the spider. It's paralyzed at first before dragging it out. Once it's outside, it will look around to make sure there's no other spiders or wasps around. It will search the immediate area, come back to the spider, lay eggs in the spider, drag it back in the hole. Now,
Wasps are mean.
What you can do is, once it's paralyzed the spider and it's moved away from the spider, is move the spider or put it back in the hole. Now, what will happen is every single time, 100% of the time, the wasp will repeat the same pattern, which is drag the spider out, leave the spider, go search the immediate area, come back, then lay the eggs, and then put it back in the hole. No matter what you do with the spider, whether you move it slightly further away, drop it back in the hole, its behavior does not change. Its behavior is a fixed pattern.
This is
hardwired. And no matter what you do, it is always the same behavior. Now, with a conscious, the reason why we believe the conscious brain developed and how it develops is to change fixed behaviors, because a change of environment without adaptable, some parts of the brain, as it grew in certain creatures, allowed for a change in variation. They were able to change and vary their behavior. Those that were able to vary their behavior survived when the environment changed. Over time, as more and more variables in the environment changed on a larger scale, more and more behaviors would require to change. Those that are able to change those behaviors on a larger scale would survive. As this grew and grew, the brain grew, the consciousness grew out of that. Simple change in variability. Now, variability, to change variable behavior, you have to have variability in the function of the brain. You can't have a fixed wide brain that doesn't allow a change in variability. You will not survive. The random mutations which allowed the variability, I'll say the variability function to add more and more variabilities, more and more changes of behaviors, allowed the brain to become, well, basically more intelligent. Out of more intelligence and more variability became more awareness of what was happening in the environment. The ability to be able to adapt and change your behavior allowed you to look at your own behavior. Once we started looking at our own behavior and to say we could change what was happening on the outside, we are now at the level of consciousness. We are now aware of our own behaviors, which means we are now aware of ourselves. This, of course, is just a very simplistic way of looking at a basic level of consciousness. You will see this in dogs. Once again, back to dogs, pigs, goats, and other higher level animals, primates in particular, able to look at their environment. They become aware of themselves in relation to their environment. Once you are aware of yourself in relation to your environment, you are aware of yourself. This is what we would call consciousness.
It's funny you say that about the introspection part, because have you ever heard about the bicameral brain theory? It was in 1976. I just grabbed it up here because I couldn't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. Julian James, who presented it in 1976. So the idea, okay, he went further on which I don't believe this is the case, but it's possible that around about the time of the Greeks, maybe a little bit earlier, people didn't have consciousness, and so the idea was. Yeah, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying that it's an interesting idea, which is effectively saying that this is the reason why people had gods at these times, and they were and it less so became that. He bases, like, to be honest, it's kind of pretty there. because he's saying that like in texts people didn't introspect, but there are multiple times in the text where people have introspected.
Yes, I think I heard this. Yes, where the consciousness was only brought about after developing gods and art and language, and prior to that, there was no consciousness, which I would disagree with, and many modern scholars would, because once you, like I said, you're aware of behaviours, which you have to be aware of your behaviours so you can adapt to the environment. You become aware of your own. If you're aware of your own behaviours to allow you to adapt to the environment, you are essentially conscious. And this does not require the means of language necessarily.
No.
There is. Once you have a adaptable, self-adaptable behavioural in relation to the environment, to what's happening to external influences and even to internal influences, then you are conscious.
There's an interesting part. Sorry, I wanted
consciousness
to
and when we say conscious, there's also a level, even higher levels when you talk about self-awareness. Animals can be conscious and not necessarily self-aware.
Yeah. Being conscious of there's a difference between being conscious of the environment and also being
your
conscious
relationship to the environment does not necessarily mean that you are self-aware of your own place in the environment. You can be conscious of your relationship in your reaction to the environment, but you may not necessarily be aware of your own sense of self. Which is another test of level of conscious, a different level of consciousness. So consciousness is not one level; it is many levels. That's also testable. Yeah.
I'll just go back to the point about the bicameral brain theory, which was effectively, it's an interesting thing. I can hear my echo of you in the background. Sorry, man. It's interesting because it was saying that effectively that in this point in time there was a part of the brain. One part of the brain was did all of the thinking, did all of the doing and so on and so forth, and then one part of the brain would do the thinking. And I mean, obviously he takes it a step further, saying that the gods were related to this and that the gods would tell you what to do and you would do it. But it's an interesting point to think that maybe part of the mind, and the reason why there are two hemispheres, is not because of this localization, and to have the corpus callosum, is that one brain, if you have two brains, they're not capable necessarily of introspecting and understanding what they're doing, but they can look at what the other part of the brain is doing, and so therefore you have some level of introspection, and then you can process that information through the corpus callosum. It'd be very interesting to see whether or not that the reason why we have two brains is because of this ability to have this relation between the two that sends information.
I don't know about that. We'd actually have to look at that and what current
I'm not sure either,
I believe you wouldn't even have to have that split hemispheres to actually have that, because
no.
But we'll I guess that's something we could look into.
Though it is interesting to understand why we even have that kind of architecture there. Like why is the structure of the brain separated into two hemispheres in the way that it is, rather than just being, because I mean, I can understand the obviously I'm not I'm not learned enough in this field to know enough about it to talk about it properly, but I mean, obviously parts of the brain have evolved off of other lower order parts of the brain, like the amygdala and so on and so forth, and up into the prefrontal cortex and so on and so forth, like that. But it's interesting that it's happened in two hemispheres, so there must be some importance, whether or not it's structural in nature, it's something to do with that, or if it's to do with the processing. There must be something very important about this ability to have processing internally and then exchanging it between the two hemispheres. There must be something very important about that for it to have arisen and been successful.
Oh, yeah, there is an appointment. It's not a matter of left brain and right brain, which is what people seem to think it is, but there would be a biological reason for that. The simplest introduction, of course, if you go to Wikipedia, it talks about the central hemispheres, and the reason why the brains are divided in two.
Could even be redundancy.
It could be, but although the brain only has such a level of redundancy, although when you talk about it having to be a necessity, it's definitely not a necessity. There's a student he's no longer a student. He's actually a scientist. He got his degree in science. It was only after he went in complaining of some headaches that it was found that only had one half of his hemisphere of his cerebral cortex. He essentially had half a brain. Now, he's got a normal functioning brain. He's above average IQ. And he's, as he puts it, I would love to have the other half because I'd be in freaking genius by now. But yeah, it just goes to prove that, yeah, the brain does have a level of redundancy built in, but it is at a certain level. Like, you can't cut away 3/4 of the brain and expect someone to still be the same person and have the same functionality.
It's a lot of it's to do with postnatal. So if it happens when you're a young child, you adapt much better than if it happens when you're an adult. They're pretty much being localized, and then if you knock it out, it's gone nearly. I mean, there's some recoverability, but it's not like when you're a child.
I think I know from when organisms are formed that rather than make left and right, I know that the DNA just literally makes a mirror copy as the map for the body to build. So more than likely, it's the same with the brain, that it's split in two halves because it's just a mirror. When you watch, as you know, there's a slight asymmetry or in most people, and there's some symmetry in some people, but you notice the slight variations between height of one eye and will be higher than the other. The reason being is rather than the brain making the DNA making a left and right copy, it makes one copy and it mirrors it. So basically, it only makes one side of the body and it swaps it for the other side when it's building. So that's more likely. It's just as simple as that came about.
It's actually very interesting that you say that, though, because there are. I mean, obviously, with people with their organs, there's obviously people that have issues with the way that they develop. Their organs develop from their blueprint, where they actually have organs in incorrect positions or in swapped positions, and it causes
basic
issues.
Genetic mutations or gene mutations and misplaced readings of genes. But it's generally the simplest explanation is, well, nature basically just one half and then it mirrors the other half because it's the simplest level of programming. So nature finds the shortest, least path of resistance. So it would come down to something as simple as that, let's say.
So how? Okay, I've got an interesting question to ask. If a person was to lose all brain function for a period of time. Or recovering to a normal state. This does happen. Obviously, we know about people that have been classified as being brain dead, or not brain. Well, but being brain dead as well. But of having no brain function and then regaining brain function again after they've had absolutely net zero brain function. Is that still the same person, or have they died?
No, I believe they're suspended. Yeah, you can have a point where you have only minimal brain function, which is really down at the lower levels. So it's just the body functioning, and there are no alpha and delta waves. So i.e. there's no higher brain function. They cease to think. They cease to be. It does go really to the point was that they're not really dead. That somebody's hit the pause. The body's hit the pause button. Even if there's no function, also goes, and when the brain function returns and it starts up again, you could say technically they are brain dead because there is no electrical activity or function there. Are they the same person? Yes, because really their patterns that are encoded into their synapses is still there. They haven't changed. They've just been stopped. It's like somebody hit pause on the tape player and then play again.
Let's ask a more fanciful question. I think most people, there's two ones that I'll ask, but the more fanciful question is, if you were to deorganize all your atoms, so let's say you took all of the atoms in your body and separated them by a meter each, that would be ridiculously large. But anyway, if you did that, so let's say you just took all your atoms apart and then transported them somewhere else and put them all back together in the exact same organization that they are now, would you be the same person?
If you put them back together exactly the same, You wouldn't be the same person because I heard this argument recently on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, another great podcast that you should look up. Anyone else out there? It definitely talks about science and skeptical issues of what's real, what's woo, what's fake. But they talked about the same thing. Essentially, we are our not only our own thoughts, but also our experiences. Now, if you took that person apart and reassembled them, we are talking teleportation here, folks, really, if you assemble in another place, they are now not having the same experience. It's a different set of experiences. We put them back together. They've skipped a whole lot of experiences. So they are essentially a different person.
Yeah,
are they the same person? Quite possibly. They're the same person with different experiences, but because we've literally removed their experiences and put them back together, we've created a new person. So we're at the point where we can say they are a different person because they're a new person because we just rebuilt them with someone else's experiences. But we can also say that they are the same person with the previous experiences in a new essential body, which we've just built for them. So really, both hold true.
Okay, what about the? I mean, my ideas about this one are a little bit more realistic and solid, which is the it's not a paradox. People talk about it as a paradox, but it's not. It's people have this fascination with saying paradox. I don't know why, but anyway, there's the ship. So if you have a ship for, let's say, 100 years, and you replace parts of the ship over 100 years, by the end of the time of the ship, is it still the same ship? Now, with people, obviously, you replace your atoms about every 5 years, right? I would suggest that you're still the same person because it's the continuity of a pattern that's more important than...
Yeah, it's a continuity of the organism as a whole. People really, when you think of the person as an individual, we're actually a collection of different organisms, but we're a governed collection of organisms. Our brain, our four patterns governed.
I would be more willing to say that you, as you, are the abstraction up here of your mind. It's the abstraction of the level of the functioning of your mind. The virtual part is the most important part, the software. But I mean, obviously, we say that they're nearly inseparable. But
a good way of putting it, if you take your arm away or you cut off your leg, do you cease to function as that person? No, you might think differently because now I'm missing a leg, but your overall patterns on balance of thought and actions would be the same. So if you replace that arm, are you still the same person? Yes. So if you do that over a period of time for every individual component, you are still essentially the same person. You just are the same person with new parts. Yes, I've heard that argument. Is that car, once you've replaced everything, is that the same person? Well, if the governing software, in this case, what's happening in the brain, is still there, and the patterns and the thoughts are still there, you're still essentially the same person.
I'd say it depends how fast it happens. So there must be a rate at which it can happen and still be the same. So I mean, obviously, I'm a transhumanist in regards to the way that I think. I'm more than for transhumanism and body modding and people doing those kind of things. I'm definitely for that.
Oh, same. We're just yet to reach that level yet. We're on the cusp.
Yeah, but my main interest was in how can we? I don't know whether or not consciousness and the ability to put consciousness into a machine is possible at this point in time, or if it will ever be possible. At this point in time, no. I think it might, but we have to find out what the mechanism for that is and what else can also.
It will be in the future.
What other means is capable of taking that? But
I think so in the future, yeah, but not yet, because we still have to, as we get better and better resolution of understanding how the brain functions and how thoughts work, we are not quite there yet, but we're getting close. And the machinery to do it, we're not there with the machinery when it comes to that. We just don't have the hardware yet. We will one day, but not yet. But we will. One day we will be. I agree that one day the singularity will happen. We will all be able to download ourselves into machines. Let's basically face it, we are biological machines as opposed to electronic circuits which are switched through silicon. We use electronics and photonics in our the way our neurons operate. And Yeah, and chemicals. So we're a chemical, biological, electrical machine. In the future, we will be a maybe chemical, electrical, mechanical machine. So that's further down the track, I think.
I think that the easiest way, like in my mind, like the way I'm not convinced about being able to transfer consciousness into machines. I think it's possible, but I don't know how possible, and I don't know to what capacity and whether or not we will be able to do it. I think that it's definitely possible, and if it's possible, it will happen within the next 1,000 years. It will happen. But I think the thing that will happen first. I think the thing that will happen first.
Yeah.
I think the thing that will happen first, and it's the most possible, and it's possible to happen within the next 200 years, is people will start augmenting their mind, their brain. So they'd be able to
add now. We augment our brain.
We do deep brain stimulation and so on and so forth. But I mean,
how many people try to memorize as many bits of facts of information out of encyclopedias anymore? No, they look it up on Google or Wikipedia. How many people carry as much information around as they used to in the past? We carry personal computers. We call them mobile phones. We are already augmenting our mental processes, outsourcing some of them. I think we'll do that with other parts of our body.
I mean more in regards to like actual fit. I mean, I know what you mean. We are part. It's like the hive mind thing as well. Like we
will actually physically augment our brains. Yeah, we will do that. We'll add components to them. That's in the future.
It seems definitely more likely that if we do those things over a long period of time. So let's say the brain can be kept alive for 200 years. I think it would be more than that if we had sufficient technology on a nanoscale to be able to do it. Or
you can. The brain should be able to actually outlast the body quite easily, yes. Barring dementia and other aging diseases which are appearing. Yes.
But the thing is, if that's the case, and we can live, like let's for the sake of argument, I think that it would be irrelevant because the brain would be able to be kept alive for longer than that if we used intervening technologies. Let's say it's 200 years. So.
Yeah, we're talking about nanite technology as well as gene therapy, etc. Yeah.
Obviously, with those things, I think that it'd be possible to definitely live for a lot longer than that. But the thing is, if that's the case, then let's say we start adding parts to our brain. Let's say we start taking functions over. Let's say we start adding memory to our brain using systems. And then what happens if the brain starts to die, but it's already integrated all of these systems? So let's say we've expanded our capabilities a lot. Like let's say, the equivalent of another mind, and we've expanded that. So we've expanded that for our brains to be able to do all the things that we can do, but twice over or something, even less than that. Let's say that happens and the brain starts dying. Does that mean that once the brain completely dies, just the biological part, does that mean that that person, because of the continuity of pattern, because it's integrated into those, it starts integrating into the machinery, and then the machine itself is still you? Like I think that's...
No, we're dead and we get a job on Red Dwarf, along with a cat that's evolved and a guy that eats curries.
That's exactly right. But I think it's an interesting part of the consequences of modification is, does that mean that becomes you? Do you become that? Because if that's the case,
then how much is replaced is you and how much is no longer you?
How fast does...
If our patterns of thought and behaviors are the same and would fit, and the growth and the change that we would normally do, then I would say, yes, that's still you. Yeah. How we judge that is another thing. That's the same question that modern psychology has. The only way we can determine how somebody is or how somebody thinks is by external behavior. We can't talk about innateness because you can't measure innateness. You can only measure external factors. Yeah, so it will be determined. Will there be a ultimate Turing test? Turing never expected his test to be...
The problem is you can ask, it's the zombie philosophy thing again. If people don't have consciousness, how do you know that they don't have consciousness unless you understand the mechanisms for it? If you can't find the mechanism for it, then how do you know someone...
We certainly can understand basic consciousness and self-awareness now and can measure it, and we are able to test for it. It's the level of... There's, like I said earlier, there's different levels of consciousness. Whether this is a conscious person rather than just a conscious being, that's a different question.
The problem is
we're into philosophy is what makes the person a person, And how far we can measure basic consciousness levels. The complexity, I guess, of the human consciousness is it's a pretty vast question at this stage. We can measure and quantify some of it at this point. That's when what consciousness is a big open question. We know what some of what consciousness is. We can't say really what all consciousness is. Yeah.
I think the biggest problem about things like the Turing test is the Turing test in itself. No, I'm not saying you said the Turing test, but something similar to that is innately failed because it's not good, because the thing is that it's like, you know, if a machine can hold a conversation with someone and they think it's another person and it passes the test, but that doesn't mean it's just fooled you into thinking that it is. And the thing is,
Turing himself never actually intended that to be a test of consciousness. It was just to see whether a machine could act like a human, not whether it was conscious. Yeah, so we do need a better test.
Machines can be conscious, but
we can test for consciousness and self-awareness, but whether we can test to see if that is an actual conscious person that's similar to a person, that's a different kettle of fish. So if we could test to see if it's a conscious dog brain, quite possibly to a small extent. But like I said, we can only measure by looking at the external behaviours, i.e. we can question them, we can see how they function. And that is something that we as people, when it comes to philosophy and science, will have to continue to develop further and further. So we are getting there. We're definitely a lot further than we used to be.
What we're going to do is we've got I think we can run for another 20 minutes at max, but we don't want to.
We're definitely running out of time here. We've
already run 20 minutes over time. But I've got two more questions. Two more things. Whether or not we cover them both, it doesn't matter, because it's just the first episode. We're just testing it out. But I think this one's a bit too complex for us to really answer at this point in time, which is how does consciousness arise? We don't really have a statement about that. But one that's interesting is, how does time play into the importance of consciousness, and whether or not consciousness and time and the illusion of time, or the our illusion of time is, and whether or not time is
perception of time. Perception of time, I'd say, as opposed to when we talk about physics, when we talk about time, as Professor Broncock said, time is the movement from order to disorder. It is the movement, actual physical movement of particles when you come down to it. But our perception of time, because we perceive time in intervals. We measure time in seconds, minutes and hours and nanoseconds and days and weeks and months. Well, that's a bigger question. That's something we're going to have to look at in parts and parts thereof in a future show, I guess. Like you said, we have run over, and I'd say this would be a good point in which to wrap up.
Okay, all right, we'll wrap up. Hopefully, North Korea doesn't blow a hole in South Korea. But, you know, I doubt it anyway, because they're just the same people that fucking...
Oh, I doubt it too, because China themselves, even though they support the Koreans because they're on their doorstep, would not support Korea's actions. China is a very pragmatic state when it comes to these sort of things. So, yes, if we're still here tomorrow because North Korea decided, Big Brother doesn't want me to do this, that would be a good thing.
All right, no problem. So that's the end of the first episode of Anything and Everything with a Reason. Hopefully the next episode will be a little bit more organized, but we knew this was going to be disorganized anyway because it's the first one.
Yeah, so, we had a fairly basic pattern and a running sheet, and we've followed it. So hopefully you're entertained. Yes, if anybody's got questions or comments, which they can probably post onto the YouTube video. And
also there's the Facebook page as well, which is Anything and Everything with the Reason. I'll put that in the description as well.
Yep, website to be coming. We'll have a temporary website which you can link to, and the complete website will be available later. So with that, I will say goodbye and put it over to our host to wrap up. Thank you, Riordan.
Okay, well, that's pretty much it. So we're just going to wrap up today. Hopefully next one will be a little bit more organized, but that's pretty much it. So have a good night and or day or whatever, and we'll see you next time. All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you later, everybody.
All right, that was